Secret Service members to ignore the chain of command if they're given unlawful orders.
Right.
Quote, arrested and put on trial, saying their actions are seditious behavior from traitors that is, quote, punishable by death.
Oath and their obligation. And there's plenty of reason to be concerned. Donald Trump actually asked whether he could shoot protesters in the leg during the protests at Lafayette Square. Donald Trump has said he's going to go to war with Chicago and send troops into our cities, several of which have already been declared illegal by federal courts.
Okay, this is absolutely unprecedented, and I need you to understand just how massive this development is. A federal judge just ordered a complete nationwide freeze of Donald Trump's assets. We're talking about all major bank accounts, all real estate holdings, everything. President Trump can't touch his money right now. He can't sell properties. He can't move assets around. Everything is locked down by court order. This happened in November 2025, and it comes after some absolutely devastating financial records got leaked and then authenticated by the court. We're talking about documents that show extensive fraud, misrepresentation, and illicit financial transactions on a scale that's honestly hard to wrap your head around. Judge Mary Ann Keller looked at this evidence and said we need to freeze everything immediately before Trump can hide assets or move money offshore. And yeah, that's exactly what the order says. Trump's wealth is at risk of dissipation, transfer, or concealment. Those are the judge's words, not mine. The court literally believes Trump might try to hide his money if given the chance, so they're not giving him that chance. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And we want to start a public conversation about what the obligation of our troops really is. In the very same way, I will say, that I did before I deployed my paratrooper platoon to Iraq in 2003. That, you know, members of Congress, their fellow veterans, we stand by them, we see them, and we are reminding them of their oath.
Congressman, you know, you have served honorably. We thank you for your service. So did most in that video, but so did retired four-star General Barry McCaffrey. And he had this to say in response to your video. He said, this action by Democrats is unwarranted and dangerous.
The court believes immediate action is necessary, and the evidence that triggered this, holy hell, is bad. The leaked financial records apparently show over $500 million in suspected fraudulent loans, asset overvaluations, and concealed offshore movements. We're talking about Trump and his organization deliberately lying about property values to get better loan terms, hiding assets from tax authorities, moving money offshore to avoid scrutiny, the whole playbook of financial fraud. And here's the thing, this isn't coming out of nowhere. Judge Engoron already found Trump liable for fraud in earlier cases involving the Trump organization. Those findings established a pattern of financial misrepresentation, but these newly leaked documents take it to a whole different level. We're seeing the full scope of the operation now. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the coordinated effort between Trump and senior aides to mislead regulators, tax authorities, and investors. It's all there in black and white, and the court just authenticated it. Judge Keller's order doesn't just freeze assets, it bans any transfers or encumbrance by Trump, his family members, or his agents. That means Trump can't have someone else move money for him. He can't have his kids transfer property. He can't have business associates shuffle assets around. Everyone connected to Trump's finances is covered by this freeze. The order also mandates immediate reporting of any attempted moves. If Trump or anyone acting on his behalf tries to access frozen assets, they have to report it to the court immediately. And if they don't, that's contempt of court, which means jail time. Financial experts and media commentators are describing this as locking in Trump's financial fate. The government is essentially preserving Trump's wealth so it's available for recovery in civil fraud cases or criminal forfeiture actions. If Trump is ultimately found liable or convicted, the government wants to make sure there's actually money left to recover. They don't want Trump spending the next year moving assets to offshore accounts in countries without extradition treaties. So they're locking everything down now. The political implications of this are absolutely explosive. Trump has always presented himself as this incredibly successful businessman, this financial genius who built a massive empire. His wealth has been central to his political identity and his appeal to supporters who see him as someone who succeeded in business and can apply those skills to running the country. Well, that entire narrative just took a massive hit. A federal judge just froze all of Trump's assets because the court believes he's engaged in extensive financial fraud. That's not partisan political attacks. That's a court order based on authenticated evidence. Trump supporters are obviously going to spin this as more persecution, more witch hunt, more deep state conspiracy to take down Trump by any means necessary. But it's going to be harder to sell that narrative when we're talking about Trump's own financial records showing fraud. These aren't allegations from political enemies. These are Trump's actual documents showing what he actually did. The leaked records came from inside Trump's own organization, and they show a deliberate, coordinated scheme to commit financial fraud on a massive scale. Democrats and Trump critics are treating this as vindication. They've been saying for years that Trump's business empire was built on fraud and deception, that his claims of wealth were exaggerated, that he was hiding financial crimes. Well, now there's a court order based on evidence that supports all of those claims. The judge looked at the financial records and concluded the fraud is so extensive and Trump is such a flight risk for his assets that a nationwide freeze is necessary. And let's talk about that nationwide scope for a second, because that's significant. Asset freezes usually target specific accounts or properties under investigation, but this order covers everything Trump owns across the entire country. That suggests the evidence shows fraud touching every aspect of Trump's financial empire, not just isolated incidents. The corruption apparently runs through the whole operation. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly what these leaked records show, why the asset freeze is so unprecedented, and what happens next. This is the kind of financial collapse that could end Trump's business empire and potentially his political career. And trust me, you're going to want to understand how we got here. All right, let's dig into what these leaked financial records actually show, because the details are absolutely crucial to understanding why a federal judge took the extraordinary step of freezing all of Trump's assets nationwide. We're not talking about minor accounting errors or aggressive but legal tax strategies. We're talking about systematic, deliberate fraud on a massive scale. The records apparently reveal over $500 million in suspected fraudulent loans. How does that work? Well, you take a property, let's say a Trump golf course or one of his buildings, and you tell the bank it's worth way more than it actually is. You provide inflated appraisals, you exaggerate income projections, you hide problems with the property. The bank, believing your representations, gives you a loan based on that artificially high valuation. That's fraud. You obtain money under false pretenses. And according to these leaked documents, Trump's organization did this systematically across multiple properties and multiple loans, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. But it gets worse. The records also show asset overvaluations for purposes beyond just getting loans. Trump apparently valued properties one way when talking to lenders, super high to get big loans, and then valued the same properties much lower when dealing with tax authorities to reduce his tax burden. That's classic fraud. You can't tell the bank your property is worth $200 million to get a loan, and then tell the IRS it's only worth $50 million to pay less in taxes. That's illegal misrepresentation to both institutions. And the leaked documents apparently show Trump's organization doing exactly that, repeatedly, for years. Then there's the offshore movement of funds. The records reveal previously undisclosed accounts in foreign jurisdictions where Trump was apparently moving money to keep it away from U.S. authorities. We're talking about shell companies in tax havens, accounts in banks that don't cooperate with U.S. investigations, the whole apparatus of hiding wealth offshore. Why would someone do that? Usually because they're trying to hide money from tax collectors, from creditors, from people they've defrauded, or from law enforcement investigating financial crimes. The documents also show coordination between Trump and senior aides to deliberately mislead regulators, tax authorities, and investors. This wasn't Trump making innocent mistakes or his accountants being overly aggressive. This was a deliberate scheme with multiple people involved discussing how to present false information to get favorable treatment. That coordination is crucial from a legal standpoint because it shows intent. It shows Trump knew what he was doing was wrong and did it anyway with help from his team. Judge Keller's order specifically mentions that Trump's assets were at risk of dissipation, transfer, or concealment. Let's break down what that means. Dissipation means spending or wasting assets so they're not available for recovery. Like if Trump knew he might lose a fraud case, he could just spend all his money on personal expenses so there's nothing left for victims to recover. Transfer means moving ownership to other people or entities to hide assets from courts or creditors. Trump could transfer properties to his kids or to shell companies he controls to make it look like he doesn't own them anymore. Concealment means hiding assets so nobody knows they exist, like those offshore accounts the leaked records revealed. The judge looked at the evidence and concluded all three of those risks were real and immediate. Without a freeze, Trump would likely move assets around to protect them from legal consequences. So the court stepped in to preserve everything as it currently exists. Now this asset freeze builds on earlier fraud findings. Judge Engoron already ruled that Trump committed fraud in how he valued assets for financial gain. That earlier case established the pattern. But these newly leaked documents show the fraud was even more extensive than what was covered in that case. We're seeing the full picture now of a decades-long scheme to defraud lenders, tax authorities, and investors through systematic misrepresentation of asset values and concealment of true financial positions. Legal experts are saying this freeze sets up potential criminal forfeiture actions. Here's how that works. If Trump is convicted of financial crimes, the government can seize assets that were obtained through or used in those crimes, but they can only seize assets that still exist. If Trump spent everything or hid it offshore before conviction, there's nothing to seize. So prosecutors often seek asset freezes early in the process to preserve assets for potential forfeiture. That's exactly what's happening here. The freeze also affects Trump's family members and agents. The court order specifically prohibits Trump's kids from moving assets, prohibits Trump organization executives from transferring properties, prohibits Trump's lawyers and accountants from helping him restructure finances to evade the freeze. Everyone in Trump's orbit who might help him hide assets is covered by this order, and if they violate it, that's contempt of court. We're talking serious jail time and personal financial liability. The order requires immediate reporting of any attempted asset moves. That's a clever enforcement mechanism. It means Trump's banks have to report if he tries to access frozen accounts. Title companies have to report if he tries to sell frozen properties. Every financial institution Trump deals with is now required to tell the court if he attempts to circumvent the freeze. That creates a surveillance network ensuring compliance. From a practical standpoint, how does Trump even function financially with all his assets frozen? Well, the court typically allows for basic living expenses. Trump can probably still pay for housing, food, transportation, the necessities, but he can't make major purchases, can't invest in new business ventures, can't move money around. His financial life is on hold until the legal proceedings resolve. This has massive implications for the Trump organization as a business. If Trump can't access funds to pay employees, maintain properties, or meet loan obligations, the business could start falling apart, properties could go into foreclosure, employees could quit, business partners could terminate agreements. The freeze doesn't just affect Trump personally, it potentially unravels his entire business empire. And that might be partly the point. By freezing assets now, the government ensures there's something left to recover if Trump is found liable in civil cases or convicted in criminal cases. Without the freeze, Trump could spend the next year dismantling his empire, hiding assets, and leaving nothing for victims or the government to recover. The unprecedented nature of this freeze is worth emphasizing. We've seen asset freezes in organized crime cases, in drug trafficking cases, in cases involving foreign nationals hiding assets in the U.S., but freezing the assets of a sitting U.S. president based on leaked financial records showing extensive fraud, that's new territory. It signals that courts are willing to treat Trump like any other defendant when the evidence warrants it. The leak itself raises interesting questions. Where did these records come from? Probably someone inside Trump's organization who had access to sensitive financial documents and decided to blow the whistle. Could be an accountant who got tired of helping with fraud. Could be a lawyer who realized they were being used in criminal schemes. Could be a business associate who decided cooperation with investigators was better than going down with Trump. We don't know yet who leaked the documents, but their decision to do so just triggered the biggest financial consequence Trump has faced in his business career. The authentication process is also important. The court didn't just take the leaked documents at face value. Forensic accountants examined them. Handwriting and signature experts verified their authenticity. The documents were cross-referenced with bank records and tax filings. The court did its due diligence to ensure these weren't fabricated or altered documents. And after that thorough authentication process, Judge Keller concluded the documents are real and they show exactly what they appear to show: extensive financial fraud by Trump and his organization. So where does this leave Trump? Legally, he's facing civil fraud cases where plaintiffs can now point to authenticated documents showing fraud. He's facing potential criminal charges for financial crimes with evidence that's been vetted by the court. He's got all his assets frozen so he can't hide or spend them before legal consequences arrive. And he's got a judge who's made clear the court believes he's a fraud risk who will try to conceal assets if given the opportunity. That's about as bad as it gets from a legal standpoint. Trump's usual tactics of delay and deny are going to be much harder now. The evidence is authenticated, the assets are frozen, the court is watching closely for any attempt to evade consequences. The walls are closing in, and they're closing in fast. Can you believe this? A sitting president with all his assets frozen nationwide because a court reviewed evidence of his financial fraud and decided immediate action was necessary to preserve those assets for eventual recovery. This is absolutely unprecedented, and the implications are staggering. Okay, Let's break this down into clear points so everyone understands exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what comes next. Point number 1, this asset freeze is about protecting money for eventual recovery. When someone commits fraud, victims have a right to recover their losses. When someone commits financial crimes, the government has a right to seize assets obtained through those crimes. But those recovery efforts only work if there are actually assets to recover. If the defendant spends everything or hides it offshore before the case resolves, victims and the government get nothing. That's why courts issue asset freezes in serious fraud cases. They preserve the status quo financially so assets are available for recovery later. Judge Keller looked at the evidence against Trump and concluded the risk of him hiding or spending assets before the case resolves was too high. So she froze everything to ensure it's still there when the legal process finishes. This is standard practice in major fraud cases. What's unprecedented is applying it to a sitting president with a massive business empire. But the legal principle is the same. Preserve assets now, sort out who gets what later. What this means for Trump practically is that his net worth is essentially locked in place. He can't grow it by making new investments. He can't shrink it by spending money or moving it offshore. Whatever he's worth right now is what he's going to be worth when this case resolves, minus any court order payments for living expenses and legal fees. Point number 2, the evidence of fraud is apparently overwhelming. Courts don't issue nationwide asset freezes lightly. They require clear evidence that serious crimes or frauds occurred and that there's a real risk the defendant will try to hide assets. Judge Keller reviewed the leaked financial records, had them authenticated by experts, and concluded both conditions were met. The documents apparently show such extensive and deliberate fraud that the court had no choice but to take immediate action. We're talking about $500 million in suspected fraudulent loans. That's not a minor accounting dispute. That's $500 million obtained through lies about asset values. We're talking about systematic overvaluation of properties to lenders while undervaluing the same properties to tax authorities. That's not aggressive tax planning. That's fraud against both institutions. We're talking about concealed offshore accounts and shell companies designed to hide wealth from U.S. authorities. That's not smart financial planning. That's deliberate concealment of assets to evade taxes and regulatory oversight. The coordination between Trump and senior aides, shown in the documents, demonstrates this wasn't innocent mistakes. This was a deliberate scheme with multiple people involved. That level of evidence is what convinced the judge to issue such a sweeping freeze. And the fact that the documents came from inside Trump's organization and have been forensically authenticated means they're going to be very hard to challenge. Trump can't claim they're fabricated or taken out of context when his own people created them and experts have verified their authenticity. Point number 3, this freeze affects Trump's entire financial ecosystem. It's not just Trump who can't access the frozen assets. His family members can't either. Trump Organization executives can't transfer properties or move money. Trump's business partners can't restructure deals to help him evade the freeze. Everyone in Trump's financial orbit is covered by this court order. That creates enormous pressure on Trump's business empire. Employees might start looking for other jobs if they're worried about getting paid. Business partners might terminate agreements if Trump can't meet financial obligations. Lenders might call in loans if Trump's in default due to the freeze. The entire Trump organization could start unraveling, not because of direct legal action against it, but because the asset freeze makes it impossible to function normally. And that's somewhat by design. The more financial pressure Trump faces, the more incentive he has to settle civil cases or cooperate with authorities. If fighting the charges means watching his business empire collapse while his assets are frozen, maybe he decides a settlement is the better option. That's part of the leverage prosecutors gain from a comprehensive asset freeze. Trump's also facing the mandate to report any attempted asset moves. That means he can't even try to circumvent the freeze without the court finding out immediately. If he asks a family member to transfer property on his behalf, that has to be reported. If he tries to access a frozen bank account, that has to be reported. The reporting requirement creates a surveillance system, ensuring Trump can't evade the freeze, even through indirect means. Point number 4, the political and reputational damage is massive. Trump has built his entire brand on being a successful businessman. His wealth has been central to his political appeal. Supporters see him as someone who succeeded in the private sector and can bring those skills to government. Well, that entire narrative just collapsed. A federal court has frozen all of Trump's assets because evidence shows his business success was built on fraud. He didn't build a great empire through smart deals and hard work. He built it through lies, deception, and criminal activity. That's what the authenticated financial records show. That's what the court concluded based on evidence. For Trump supporters who are deeply invested in his persona as a business genius, this is devastating. It reveals that the success they admired was fake, built on fraud. Some will double down and claim it's all a setup, but others might start questioning whether they've been supporting someone who's been lying to them all along. For Trump's political opponents, this is vindication. They've been saying for years that Trump was a fraud, that his business empire was built on lies, that he wasn't the successful businessman he claimed to be. Now there's a court order based on authenticated evidence supporting all of those claims. The freeze also affects Trump's political operation practically. If Trump can't access his personal wealth, he can't self-fund his political activities the way he has in the past. He becomes more dependent on donations, which gives donors more leverage over him. He might have to cut back on expenses if he can't access frozen funds. The financial constraints created by the freeze could limit his political effectiveness, and the optics are terrible. How do you campaign as a strong leader who gets things done when a court has frozen all your assets because you committed fraud? How do you attack opponents as corrupt when you're facing criminal forfeiture of your own assets? The asset freeze undermines Trump's political messaging in fundamental ways. Point number 5. What happens next depends on how the legal cases proceed. If Trump is found liable in civil fraud cases, the frozen assets can be used to pay judgments to victims. If he's convicted in criminal cases, the government can forfeit assets that were obtained through or used in crimes. If he somehow prevails in court and the fraud allegations are disproven, the freeze would be lifted and Trump would regain access to his assets. But based on the evidence we're seeing, the authenticated financial records showing extensive fraud, the prior fraud findings from Judge Engoron, the coordination between Trump and aides to mislead authorities, it seems unlikely Trump prevails completely. He might negotiate settlements in some cases. He might get convicted in others. But the days of Trump denying everything and skating by on technicalities seem to be over. The evidence is too strong. The court has taken the extraordinary step of freezing everything. The legal system is treating Trump like what he apparently is, someone who committed massive financial fraud and needs to face consequences. Trump's legal team is obviously going to fight the freeze. They'll argue it's too broad, that it's unnecessary, that it's politically motivated. They'll try to get portions of assets unfrozen so Trump can conduct business. They'll appeal the order to higher courts, but they're fighting uphill. The judge reviewed authenticated evidence of fraud and concluded immediate action was necessary. Appellate courts typically defer to trial judges on these kinds of evidentiary determinations unless there's clear abuse of discretion. And it's hard to argue abuse of discretion when the evidence of fraud is so extensive. So we're looking at a situation where Trump's assets remain frozen while multiple legal cases proceed. That could take months or even years. During that time, Trump's business empire might collapse from the financial pressure. His political brand takes massive damage from the revelation of fraud. His wealth becomes unavailable to him, even though he's theoretically worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a devastating combination of legal, financial, and political consequences, all stemming from those leaked financial records. Is this the end for Trump? That might be overstating things. The man has survived countless scandals and legal challenges. He has a talent for political survival that defies normal rules, but this is different. This isn't allegations he can deny or spin. This is authenticated financial records showing fraud. This is a court order freezing all his assets. This is the legal system saying we have evidence, you're a criminal, and we're taking immediate action to preserve assets for recovery. That's as serious as it gets. So keep watching, because what happens next is going to determine whether Trump faces real accountability for decades of alleged financial fraud or whether he somehow manages to escape consequences one more time. Are you kidding me? This is absolutely explosive. But that's a story that's still unfolding.